we'll start the recording and then we'll start with this. So let me do the basics. So we're currently in sprint 5 of Dangerous Edition with a total of 6 sprints. What we're looking at is this is the feature-free sprint, which means by 4/21. So this sprint spans 4 weeks, going from today through the 21st of April. The big thing in this sprint is, of course, ONS and integration. So there is the current plan was that there would be some eCoord and mCoord integration, right, with the refactored platform. So we kind of need to work through what that looks like, what we're going to look like as we head into feature freeze, whether feature freeze would be at risk or not. Because our intent with feature freeze is that functionality would be in and would be merged by the time we hit 4/21. Because what that allows us to do is by sprint 6 on 4/24, we'll be able to stabilize that and make sure that things are stable enough for us to head towards release. That allows us to focus on bug fixes and documentation so that we can bring on, folks that are interested in this. So the final release would be May 15th. So that's a quick recap of the overall kind of schedule. And then what we want to do then is, for folks that have missed it, what I wanted to do is take essentially the first half an hour and just talk through the integration effort. So where are things at in terms of XOS, in terms of eCoord, mCoord, and whether we're going to be able to do integration in this sprint. So Andy, do you want to go over XOS?
Yeah, sure. So if you could, on your screen, switch back to that other document, that might be useful. So Yen mentioned during the sprint review last week that it would be useful to get a summary of what was the end state of all of the various refactoring efforts. Like, where do we expect to end up when we're done? And what is the current state of that? And then also, what is the impact on developers of these refactoring efforts? How much work is it going to create for people, primarily, I guess, like the eCoord and mCoord teams, as they try to integrate with these new changes? So I created this document. It's in the Dangerous Editions folder. I think it's a little bit terse right now, but it's, I think, basically a pretty good start that we can add to as people have questions or things are not clear. So I encourage everybody to go take a look at it. But I'll just go ahead and kind of walk through this document briefly. So apologies for not having slides, but I just got done with this like 10 minutes ago. So let's start with the build system refactor. And if anybody has questions, feel free to just interrupt me. Right, so the goal here is we have this container pipeline, fetch and build and publish and deploy Docker containers. But as we all know, XOS containers weren't really fitting into that pipeline. They were getting built at some other stage. So the goal is to fix that. So the end state we're going for is all of the XOS container images are built in the build stage on the dev VM, on core dev, and published to the head nodes registry, which they're then pulled from at the deploy stage. I'm going to skip over some of these items. I'm not going to go through them one by one, but feel free to read the document. So the onboarding synchronizer currently is building images in the deploy stage. So the end state is that will no longer be the case. The onboarding synchronizer just is activating models in the XOS core. It's not building any containers or building any images. And there'll be a single Docker Compose file associated with each profile that brings up all the XOS containers. So in order to bring up XOS, all the containers of XOS, it's just Docker compose up. It's there, and that's it. This involves moving things around in the build process, and it can disrupt developers' workflow. And so as part of this effort, we want to make sure that we either preserve the existing workflows, or if they need to be changed, at least verify that there is a new workflow that is going to work for people and document it. So the status is the base containers are being built at the right part in the build process. The synchronizer images are still in process of getting built during the build stage. That's not done yet. The onboarding synchronizer has been changed to allow this behavior of using pre-built containers. And the other items here are still in progress. So I believe that this can be finished and wrapped up during Sprint 5. I don't think that this is in danger of missing the feature freeze. So the impact on developers of the build process changes. So the first is that synchronizer containers are now built in a different place. So developers need to, of a service, need to provide a Docker file to build that container or build that image. Previously, this was something that was automatically generated by the onboarding synchronizer, but now you need to specify it. There may be some changes to developer workflows, particularly probably for Code in a Box, people who use that for development. So that may disrupt some people. They need to learn a new workflow. Also, each profile will need to have a Docker Compose file to bring up all of the containers. I plan to do that for all of the profiles, at least get things started. So I'll take that on. So I don't think that should be a burden for anybody. So I would characterize this as pretty low impact on developers, modulo maybe the workflow issue. Are there any questions or comments about that before I move on to the next XOS core refactor?
So question around this. Development
Yes.
workflows may change. Do we know what would and should change?
So I think the main, so the developer workflow for XOS developers, I think, will remain the same. So there's a Ansible script that can be used to deploy XOS in a front-end only configuration inside a development VM, Vagrant VM. That will remain the same. I think the process of deploying container updates to a full pod by going back to the development machine and walking through the fetch and build, publish stages, that should remain the same. The thing that might change is, I think I've mainly heard about this from Scott, that he does development on Code in a Box in a particular way that depends on building XOS containers on the head node. And since now that is at least currently not supported anymore, you have to go back to the core dev VM to build things. That workflow might get changed, but Scott and I are still talking about what that might look like, how, if there's some way that we could support his current workflow without, breaking it too much. So I think mainly it affects Scott.
Andy,
Yes.
can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
I do have 2 questions. One is mainly concerned, they're both concerned on timing. The first one is, will the old method of auto-generated Docker Compose file be still available until you complete these new Docker Compose files?
Yes. Yes, the answer to that is yes. We've changed the onboarding synchronizer so you can do things the old way or the new way on a service-by-service basis.
Okay. And the second one, will you be doing this? Do you know the end goal time-wise? I mean, what's the end goal? What's the end timing? Or do you know a time frame when this will be done?
Well, we plan to get it done this sprint. It won't get done before ONS, I'm pretty sure. So I guess hopefully, so how long after ONS will it get done? That's hard to say. So I know that the eCord and mCord integration efforts are, I think, basically need to wait until all of the things, or almost all of the things, the refactors in this document are completed before they want to invest too much time in it. So, we're aware of that, and we're pushing as hard as we can to get all this stuff done and tied up so that there's enough time during this sprint to do the integration. But is that at risk, getting that integration done during the sprint? I would say maybe it is.
Okay. One thing maybe that would help us developers on doing stuff is pointing on this document. I know it's very difficult, but maybe putting a kind of end goal date, meaning we plan to do this by this date. I know it's very difficult, but at least I know not to start work on something that will be changed at a later date. At least This is my opinion.
Sure. Yeah, as long as we're not held too tightly to these estimates, because they're based often, on optimism and things.
No. Sure. But the idea is that if I see an end date that is 2 weeks from now, I don't even start working on that.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Thanks for that feedback.
So we have.
No problem.
So I added the note that we need timing for the in-progress items. I think the other thing to keep in mind is that there are stand-ups for the cord side, so it's probably pretty critical for those who are dependent on the XOS functionality to be a part of the stand-up so that you can see kind of the day-to-day progress. This way we can adjust as needed very quickly.
Yeah, that sounds good. Okay, so any more questions on the build system refactor? If not, I'll move on. Okay, so it sounds like there's not. So the next thing in the document is the XOS core refactor. So the basic theme of all of the XOS refactor, or one of the main themes, has been removing dependence on Django and trying to use more modern tools for tying things together with a data model. So the XOS core refactor is about replacing the Django as a communication mechanism between, say, the synchronizers and the other like UI containers with the data model, and replacing that with gRPC. So there's still a core container. So the end state is there's a core container that holds all the models for all the services. So David Bainbridge pointed out we could think of this another term for this might be the model service that holds all the models. I sort of like that rather than XOS core, but whatever. So there's the core container. It's still got all the models. All the other containers, like synchronizers and GUIs, talk to the core container using gRPC, and there's a library to make that easy. So the third piece of the end state is that the core image will be statically built with all of the known models. So when you build the core container, it's got all the models in it. They're dormant. When you onboard a service, it activates the model, but it doesn't require rebuilding the container or anything like that. Everything's already there. Now, if you add a brand new model that wasn't there when you built the core container originally, then you need to go back to the fetch, build, deploy, fetch, build, publish, deploy pipeline and work through that. In terms of status, the first two items are finished and the third is currently in progress. So in terms of impact, any questions before I move on to impact on developers?
So just one thing I think we could add to the end state is that we do use Chameleon to give people a REST API on top of gRPC. So anyone who was counting on having a REST API, there is still a REST API there.
Yeah, so my mistake, I forgot to add that. Right. So in terms of impact on developers, this is a fairly major change to synchronizers. And so there's a number of steps that need to happen in order to get synchronizers to use gRPC. And Scott listed them out here. There are already some example synchronizers that have been ported to do this, so hopefully that will be useful to people. And I think Scott is probably the expert to ping if you run into problems. But this is going to, I think, have some impact on the MCord and the eCord efforts. And as I mentioned before, the work isn't quite complete yet. Andrea, I don't have a date yet, but we'll try to get one. And so there's a fair amount of work here, and it can't be started just yet.
So realistically, when can eCord and MCord start their integration efforts? Not until after ONS? Normally?
Almost certainly not until after ONS, but I expect they'll probably be too busy with other things to start on it before ONS.
Agreed. But are we, after ONS, we're looking at, I think, less than 3 weeks, right? So we start this week. We've got essentially 2 weeks, I think, after ONS. So we're still working on the in-progress items for XOS. Realistically, are we looking at just 1 week of integration?
So I think on this particular item, Scott is taking the lead. I don't know, Scott, if you have an estimate on when you think that the third item there might be finished and that people could start going through these tasks to port their synchronizers over.
So I think people can start porting the synchronizers fairly quickly. I've been porting over RCord synchronizers one at a time, and I have them all done. So it is, it's actually doable now. It's just that the workflows that we have for actually testing this are not very clean, and that's what I'm trying to get at right now, is a clean workflow for switching XOS over to the RCord new profile, or for people developing the MCord new or eCord new profiles that would use their new synchronizers. So you can start on this almost immediately. I probably need to write up some additional guidelines and help to let people know how to do it, but there's really nothing that prevents someone from getting a head start on modifying synchronizers. It's even possible to convert a synchronizer over to use the new base class and still have it use Django as a back end before switching to the API. So this I think we're in pretty good shape on.
Okay, so I've noted can start integration now, but test workflow is not clean. Scott will need to provide some additional documentation to help facilitate this.
Yeah, sounds good.
And then going back to the build one, I think we said this one would be post ONS?
Yes. I guess, if I'm put on this, yeah, I don't, definitely post ONS. I hope that I could wrap this up in a week after ONS, but that might be optimistic.
And just another note on the core refactor section, to start moving synchronizers to the new base, people will have to transition to using master for those people who are currently working in Chord 2.0 because none exists in Chord 2.0.
So Scott, is switching over from Chord 2.0 to master going to require other changes outside of kind of the narrow changes that we've been thinking about here?
Yeah, so it's going to take, Chord 2.0 was based on the service profiles and make files. Master is not, the build system has changed considerably in master, so people may have to update their profiles to support the new build system. I think Zach would be possibly the best person to fill in details on what might need to change. I think he may already have some guides out there to help people transition.
Yeah, that's the case. I have a document for that. And I think that was really helpful for the eCord refactoring that was done. So just let me know if you need help with that, and I can point you at where to look.
Okay, maybe we can just add the document as a link here at some point.
And it sounds like eCord may have already switched over to master, or at least parts of master. If that's true, then they're already ahead of the game on that.
Right, so I guess this mainly affects MCord in that case.
Okay.
All right, any other questions about the XOS core? All right, so the third and final refactoring effort was to use protobufs to represent the XOS data model in the core container. I'm sorry, was there a question? Okay. Using protobufs to represent the data model. again, to break the dependency on Django. So the end state is, this is, there's a number of aspects to the end state, but at a high level, you can think of the XOS core is, has a protobuf representation of the data model, and synchronizers are specifying, I mean, services are specifying their models using something that looks very much like protobufs. But let's dig into the end state a little bit. So there's a there will be a sugared syntax for protobufs called xproto, and it allows, it's for concise expression of models, and also it's got a certain richness to it that I guess my understanding is things that are difficult to specify directly in xproto are provided kind of a shorthand specification. Sorry, let me try that again. Things that are difficult to express in protobufs are provided kind of a shorthand specification in xproto. So xproto is the language by which data models are specified in text. So there's a link in this document to where the core models are specified in xproto right now. So another part of the end state is that there's a tool chain called Uber that's based on protobufs that can be used to generate code from the data model. So code for UIs, code for APIs, code for other kinds of models like Django or other things, Yang, for instance. And what this is used for is to convert between xproto, this sugared syntax, and raw protobufs. It's used for generating Django models from protobufs and other stuff. So the XOS core container has internal representation using protobufs, and inside there, Django is actually used as the ORM. So this is, okay, Django hasn't completely disappeared from the picture, right? But we're not dependent on Django. We're just using it as a way to actually, programmatically deal with the database internally. But the model is represented in protobuf, and then when we interact with the database, we go through Django. You can think about, as future work, replacing Django with something else. Like I just did a, I'm not an expert in this area, but I just did a Google search on protobuf ORM, and I found that there are people working on ORMs that use protobuf natively. So maybe that would be a candidate for replacing Django at some point, but I think we need to investigate that. So just to wrap up the end state before maybe we get into questions, all services are going to provide their models using xproto rather than Django, and the synchronizer dependency framework will also be based on protobufs rather than the Django models. So the first 3 of these items in the document are done. The rest are basically in progress right now. Any questions about this?
So maybe this is a longer discussion, but I thought that Xproto was intended to be the intermediate representation rather than the data model representation.
So my understanding, and if Sapin's on the line, I'm sure he can say a lot more about it, is that Xproto is the textual representation, which then gets turned into protobufs in the implementation.
Okay, so the eCord and MCord folks will have to learn Xproto.
Yeah, so let's...
If you tell me. So we're using protobufs, and protobufs through its syntax and intended semantics lets you do one set of things. Django has some capabilities that doesn't fall into that set. There are some additional things that Django lets you do, and then there's a bunch of things that XOS lets you do. What we've done is to extend protobufs using extension features within protobufs, such as options, so field options, model options, and so on. But the thing is, if you use that, then the syntax turns out to be very cumbersome. So either way, whatever you specify in protobufs gets done into an intermediate representation, which has meaning, which contains the information that Django conveys. But in order to make the format less cumbersome to read, we've introduced, I guess, what's formally called a dual syntax. It means it's exactly the same thing. It's just prettier to look at. If you don't want to use this syntax, you can just use protobufs. It's exactly the same thing, right? So you can think of a dual syntax for Python, which uses the formulations of XML, right? So you can turn a Python program into XML, and that's a dual format, and it's really bad and probably cumbersome to deal with.
So, Sapin, just a couple quick notes. We're going to need the timeline for when this is done. I think the plan was to merge this after ONS, so it's not to impact the stability of master. And then you're going to be in Menlo the week after ONS, so maybe a tutorial session while you're on site?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Then, sorry, we're kind of running out of time, and we haven't hit the eCord and MCord integration plans yet, so I wanted to make sure we wrap the XOS part up.
Okay, yeah. So I'll wrap it up really quickly. So the impact on developers of this protobufs, Xproto stuff, is not supposed to, or not expected to be very great. There is the requirement that the Xproto can be generated from the existing Django models as long as they don't have any proxy models. So I guess the way that we're envisioning service developers coming up with Xproto is that they remove the proxy models from their existing Django models and then tell Sapin, okay, it's ready, and he will take it from there and use his tool chain to generate the Xproto. So I think that should be pretty easy.
Just a clarification, when we say remove, we really mean to convert those proxy models into real database models. Because presumably whatever functionality they had was important to the surface.
Right, yeah, good point, Scott.
Okay, so from the eCord and MCord perspective, what are your thoughts? My concern is it feels like we're rapidly running out of runway. So if we were to look at this for all of the eCord and MCord services, do we feel that this could be done in at most 2 weeks after ONS, before feature freeze.
So my personal feeling is that that's going to be really tight. In the ideal world, I think we would have this sprint to finish and test all of these things that we described in this document, and then an additional integration sprint after that where we could work hand in hand with the eCord and MCord folks to get all of this nailed down. But yeah, I realize that that is changing the plan for the release cycle.
If I can give my 2 cents, I agree with Andy. This is really tight, and I plan not to take even a look at all the changes before the ONS is finished. So it's going to be really tight on my opinion, and because we're talking about 3 weeks of development still, and even more, and maybe 2 weeks of integration. So in my take is that another sprint is needed.
Okay, so if I may add my 2 cents, I think the bottleneck's going to be removing the proxy models. So in fact, if you have services that don't have proxy models, then I think those will go pretty smoothly. So that might be a determinant of predictability.
Yes. If
For
we were
MCOD thing, we also need to start with after OS. But also 2 weeks is not enough.
Well, good thing we have the TST tomorrow.
Yeah, we got something to talk about.
Yes, I think what we need to understand is how critical is the eCord and MCord integration to Dangerous Edition, and whether the TST is willing to hold off on Dangerous Edition to make it happen, or do we assume it would just be a Dangerous Edition requirement, right?
Yeah, that sounds right to me.
Okay, so I think we have an assessment. I think what happens is with Andy and Sapin and Scott being here next week and the week after, if the eCord and MCord folks can take the opportunity to work with them to understand the scoping and the effort it would actually take to do this, that would really help. And then I know we've got 15 minutes left. Let's go ahead and look at Jira. And then we can go through that, unless anyone else has questions or comments. Okay, well, we shall do.
Yen, sorry. I believe also some better documentation, if can be available, could be a good idea. The idea of the tutorial from Sapin is actually really good, in my opinion.
Yes, so Sapin, can you be sure to get something scheduled? Probably that Monday that you're in Menlo?
Will do. And if anybody has time constraints or scheduling conflicts, then please send me those conflicts.
There were also discussions of technical discussions the Friday, the week of ONS. Is that going to happen? Or Andy, Scott, you guys are flying back?
Yeah, I'll be leaving on Friday.
And I'll be leaving in the morning on Friday, so I won't be able to do that.
Okay, so I think we're looking at the tutorial session and probably any technical discussions the following Monday then, with you guys being remote. And we may need deeper dive discussions to work through this. Okay, back to Jira, not the fun topic in this session, but we'll make our way through this. Can you guys see that? Okay, so we've got 13 minutes. Let's make our way through this real quick. And then the to-do items that we'll do is we'll bring up the integration, timeline, and issues into the TST tomorrow. Does that work? So, you know, eCord and mCord folks, please attend, and then we'll have a discussion there. And I think we need to agree as a team whether the eCord and mCord integration is critical for this release or not. Okay. XOS refactoring, Matteo?
Yes. So I'll finish creating a development environment for the GUI extension, also known as custom views. I'll have to fix 2 small bugs, one to lock down the GUI dependencies to avoid that a new version will break everything, and to check why our keyboard events or shortcuts are not working in Safari. I also have to test for Firefox and eventually Explorer. Apart of that, I want to start writing some documentation around the UI before I forget everything I've done in the last month, and hopefully add Elasticsearch to the local environment so we can have centralized logs there. And that's it.
Okay, thanks, Matteo. Scott?
So this item here, add XOS support for console and registrator, that is something we still want to do, but we have no one to do it. So we're hoping anyone with spare time who wanted to do that could come forth on that. Otherwise, we can opportunistically try to have one of us pull it off at the end of the sprint. Moving forward to the ones that are assigned to me, we have refactoring the OpenStack synchronizer. This is believed done, but I am still working on trying to get the build system to do what I want so that I can end-to-end test it. Soft deleted users not reap, that's a bug. We'd like to get that taken care of. Plural endpoint names are not spelled correctly. Sapin and I talked about that. I think we want to expose that through Xproto so that people can correctly say how a endpoint should be pluralized. That'll go down to the developer. Refactoring the build process for core containers. This is the major issue that I'll be working on this sprint, and that is to get done what Andy said needed to be done, that last task, which is to build the core container on the dev machine. And then the one after that is integration of the core container. So after we've figured out how to build it, then we need to integrate it into the build system. Renaming cord subscriber root to rcord subscriber, and then moving it to the rcord repo. Right now, this model is in the OLT repo. We all recognize that's not the right place for it, so we're going to move it. The next is sort of an integration task that's finalized the rcord new profile and test. So this is pulling together all of the refactoring stuff for all of the new containers, making sure it works, and making sure we have a plan for eCord and mCord to do the same. Fix elk stack logging for refactored synchronizers. So when I refactored the synchronizers, they use a new config file. The elk stack feature patches the old config file, but not the new one. So I need to update that. That's not expected to be a big deal. Chameleon responds with a 500 for logins with the wrong credentials. That may involve me spending some time familiarizing myself with how Chameleon works internally. I'm told, I think by Mateo, that the GUI does properly work around that, so I'm treating it as a low priority issue. Improve workflow for service developers. That's just getting the appropriate workflow in place so it's easy to rebuild a service and onboard it. And then Tosca run.py generates logging exceptions. That's another bug. Believed not to be critical, but should be cleaned up.
So Scott, there are lots of stories.
I know,
Names on it.
it's a lot of stuff.
And 4 low priorities items compared to the console and registrator support. So have you considered moving the low priority items that are mostly defects into the next release? And maybe being able to pick this up, not that I think it'll happen with all the other stuff.
Yeah, that's my thought, was these low priority items. We probably won't get to them. There are things that would have been nice to get into this release. But if you'd like, we can move those off to the next, or we can delist them from the sprint so that we're not, we're not counting the points on them.
For sure, the defects that are low priority should be moved out.
Okay, I'll do that.
And then anything else that you realistically don't think will make it in.
Yeah, I mean, the problem is it all needs to get done, and it all needs to get done within the integration sprint. So long hours, I guess, and hope that some of them turn out to be less work than we think they are.
So I would encourage you to make use of the various priorities and maybe start making sure that from a prioritization standpoint, pick off the...
Okay, I'll do that.
Yeah. Because when you've got 2 levels of priority to work with there, it's going to be hard to do trade-offs.
Sure.
Okay, thanks. Refactor, build, deploy. Andy?
Yeah, I feel sort of like I've already talked enough during this call, but I mean, these are just basically restatements of the stuff that we were talking about earlier. Verifying workflows. There's the, I need to do my talk for ONS at some point. And getting the synchronizer services integrated in the build workflow. Something that maybe I'll need to take this out actually. The Cord 1080 investigating using Docker volumes to publish data to XOS containers. I probably am not going to have time to get to that, given all the other stuff that we talked about earlier. I think maybe Zach is looking into that too, so that might even be a duplicate. So I'll pull that one out.
Okay.
And then this is another high priority item for before ONS, making sure that we have a good restart procedure so that when everybody shuts their pods down and then brings them up at ONS, that they still work. But I think the MCord people have some experience here, so maybe I need to sync up with Ping to see specifically what the problems are there.
Okay, that's good. Well, we can do that.
Okay, great.
Andy?
Yeah.
Andy?
Yes.
Do you want to do that this week, or when you want to do that? I have the environment today.
Okay. Well, maybe we can just sync up over Slack first, and then we'll figure it out.
Okay, Fabric?
Okay.
The biggest story for this sprint is homing. So right now I'm creating a mini environment so we can get on it. If you refresh this page a little, you should see more stories. So yeah, dual-home support for servers, and I think Jonas' story also about dual-home, right?
Yeah, it can work on dual-homing the vRouter connection. This stuff is mainly around making sure that the connection between ONOS and Conjure is robust, so that if either the ONOS instance or the Conjure instance goes down, we react to that appropriately and reroute.
I think that's it.
The only thing is we need to make sure that we have a new ONOS build if there are any additional fixes. So assume a 1.8.5, right? So we'll need to account for work to integrate 1.8.5, but also time to work with the ONOS team to get through some of those HA issues.
None of this is targeting the release of code, as far as I know. It's work on a parallel track.
Agreed, but that just means the HA stuff is pretty critical to work through.
So the one thing is I did just upgrade Chord master to ONOS 1.8.4, which does have a lot of the HA fixes, I think, if not all of them.
Yeah, unfortunately, I think Saraf is still seeing issues, HA issues.
Yeah.
So I think Charles or Saraf, if you guys can work with John Hall, because we need to have a new version of ONOS probably latest by feature freeze, so 421.
Well,
I think
for this, I think for this specific task, we don't have a time on when to get a new ONOS version, because we're working in ONOS, right?
Yes. But for the HA issue specifically, I think we should target 421 to integrate a new version if we can get any of the HA issues fixed.
Okay.
Okay. And then QA?
Yeah, for QA, this sprint we are working on converting the framework for the control plane from the control plane framework and the data plane framework that we have written, and also create some simple tests that we start from the control plane test from the control plane, and then we also have the same test that also utilizes the data plane test framework, validates the test signals are working fine. After and we are trying to achieve that on the CIAB first, and those are the first two stories about the convergence of this framework and test. And the next one is the CI job that we want to create a new one, where we created a simple script to validate various containers in the last sprint, and now we are going to add it as part of the CI and create a genuine job so that a chain sets on these XOS containers, whatever are we will make, we validate them accordingly. The next one is the story for the XOS API test. So we want to port the XOS APIs to Chameleon. And the last one is about the physical pod. So since we already got acquired a pod for QA from QCP Labs, so we want to use it for integration and then start investigating and porting some of the existing scripts that we have on CIAB on the physical pod, and then validate and investigate how we want to use the pod for the automation framework. So that's also clear.
Okay, thanks, Chitra. Ecord?
Can I go? Because that is a very long stuff. Maybe can I go first?
Sorry, that's me.
I'm called to go first because the dry run starts.
I know the dry run is starting. So folks are, we need to head over there. We can just go ahead and call it good for this meeting. I think folks can review the stories that are in Jira. Yeah. Does that work?
Okay, that's fine.
Okay. Thanks, everyone. And I think what we need to do is at the TST meeting, eCord and mCord, specifically, please be there, and then we'll work through some of the integration timeline issues. Okay? Thanks, everyone.
Okay. Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.